Here's my game of the day from round 7 of the Sharjah Masters, and it's between Arkadij Naiditsch and Pouya Idani. Naiditsch grew up in Latvia, then he moved to Germany, and now he represents Azerbaijan. Idani is from Iran. So there we go. We got a mash of cultures just from 2 players. Naiditsch with the white pieces. He's rated 2702 currently, but we know that he is capable of beating anyone on his day. For example, he beat Magnus Carlsen a couple of years ago. Naiditsch is a really uncompromising player. He's very straightforward in his strategy. He does like to play the sharpest move, not necessarily tactical, but strategically as well. He plays the London system. Okay, this is a very pragmatic choice for professionals nowadays. Idani plays c5. Of course, if white doesn't occupy the centre with pawns, then why shouldn't black? And here you could say the main line of this particular opening is e6, and then after c3, bishop d6 for black. It's also possible to play, as Wesley So did against Anish Giri, to play like this and knight h5. That's a very interesting system, one that I recommend on my new DVD, which will be coming out in May, I believe. Okay, anyway, back we go. So e6 is the main line here. But Idani exchanges on d4 and then places bishop out to f5. Now, this doesn't look like a bad idea. Of course, white would like to put his bishop on d3, so black gets in there quickly with bishop f5. So white has a slight problem what to do with that bishop on f1. Now a6 from black. Now that's directed against bishop b5 at some point. Now perhaps not immediately, but one idea that white has is to play knight e5, trade the knights, and then bishop b5. So a6 is directed against that. I guess it also means that queen b3 could be met, for example, by knight a5, and you don't have to fear bishop b5 check, and if queen a4, the bishop can drop back. That's one idea. But yeah, it's basically directed, obviously, against bishop b5. Naiditsch played knight e5. I think, if black is playing such extravagant moves as a6, in a sense it's a waste of a move because it doesn't contribute to black's development on the king side, then it's logical that white should start action in the centre with knight e5. Idani has actually played in exactly this way before, and his opponent, Gabriel Sargsyan, a very strong Armenian player, recaptured with the bishop. And, well, in this position, I don't think black had many difficulties. Queens were traded. With the bishop outside the pawn chain, I don't think there are many difficulties. Bishop d6. Black is very solid there. Well, both sides are solid. And the game ended in a draw. But Naiditsch must have spotted this game in his preparation. And without thinking, he played pawn takes knight instead. So white has a little bit of initiative, of course, because black had to move the knight, so it's white's turn again. So how do you capitalise on the fact that black's development on the king side is so poor? Well, Naiditsch spotted a very interesting idea. G4. Bishop drops back to G6. And then H4. Clearly this is a threat. In fact, this has been played before by Lupulescu against Svetushkin, so two decent players. And that game went knight c5. So that's to give the piece, the bishop, a square on d3. Game went like this. So the bishop on e3 hits the knight on c5. And here white has a positional advantage. e6, very typical move to bottle up black's pieces. And then white sat on the central squares with the bishop and knight. Obviously, clear positional advantage. So after h4, what did black do? Well, Idani played h5. Now, if white doesn't react quickly here, then his whole kingside pawn structure is just a mess, just a wreck. You know, if white were to exchange on h5, for example, then the pawns are split and black can play e6 with this beautifully solid structure, and what black is just better. So Naiditsch has to react quickly. Of course, he'd anticipated this, and he played this typical move e6 to double these pawns, and that means that this bishop on f8 simply can't get in the game. Of course, it's not quite as simple as that. There are lots of details to consider. And well, Naiditsch plays really energetically with knight f3, giving up a second pawn, but of course looking to clamp on e5, possibly move to g5. And after h6, g4, in fact, neither of those options, he played bishop d3. So you can see that white's development is rapid. If bishop takes, then that brings the queen into the game. Suddenly mate is threatened, and in combination with the knight coming into the game, that looks deadly. Therefore, Idani played bishop h5 to try and hold things together, but queen c2 reinstated this threat of mate. Queen moves away to give the king some room. So check. King edges to the side. A very difficult position for black already. He might be 2 pawns up, but that bishop is locked in. His king is floating around in the middle. Now, at the moment, the centre is closed, so it's not so serious. But even so, you can see that black's pieces are just completely split. So can white exploit that before these pieces get in the game? Knight g5, so that starts to look at knight f7, maybe looking at e6 as well. It's all very nice. So the king moves away again, knight f7. Now black has to exchange on g6, because obviously if the rook is attacked, if it moves to g8, then you take here. So bishop takes, queen takes. Now the rook is free to move. Oh, incidentally, if queen takes pawn, well, white will just castle on the king's side. I know white's pawns look at a complete wreck, but you have to consider that all the white's pieces are now in the game. Well, let me just show you one typical variation. So rook takes pawn. What's the score? Black is 4 pawns up, but who cares? White's pieces are just having a fantastic time. So the knight steps out, threatening queen e8 mate. Queen f7, threatening queen takes bishop. The rook comes back, and now rook e1 seals the deal. The queen moves, and then queen takes pawn on e6, and well, mate follows shortly. Catastrophe. So in this position, instead of queen b2, the rook is attacked. It moved to the side. Now there are many nice moves here. You could play very simply, just blockading on e5 and castle's queenside, it's very hard to see how black is going to emerge from his difficulties. But Naiditsch played, after almost 25 minutes, played knight g5. Also incredibly strong. So he wants to take here. Or, of course, there's this possibility. At the moment the queen can block, but bear that in mind. Obviously the queen can't take on b2. So e5. Black is seeking salvation in an endgame. Would like to exchange queens, of course. But Naiditsch is having none of that. Queen f7. Rook moves to the side, and now just bishop g3. Naiditsch is a really confident player, and although black has got e5 in, he trusts that his piece activity is simply going to blow black away, and of course his judgment was absolutely correct. The game went rook h6, castle's queenside e6, so black is fighting to get his bishop into the game, but Naiditsch had it all worked out. Bishop e5, so that gets one of the pawns, but another of the pawns back. So black now has only one pawn advantage for this wreck of a position. If, let's say, queen d8, then just rook e1, and well, the queen can keep hiding away there. And I don't think black's going to survive this. This is under fire. Rook takes pawn is threatened. Must be winning for white. Black played knight takes bishop. Queen takes bishop, check. Queen has to interpose. Queen takes pawn, and the queen threatens both rook and knight. Now, relatively best in this position is to play queen h8, but this endgame is hopeless in this position. Now white has a 2-pawn advantage and shouldn't be difficult to win. Instead of that, black defended with queen f6, but simply queen g8, won the rook in the corner, and that was that. Black decided to call it a day. A completely crushing victory for Naiditsch, and I find it extraordinary that this London system with bishop f4 is still claiming scalps, and also in a kind of really spectacular way. White often wins very quick and dramatic, very quick and dramatic games. But in my opinion, it's not really that dangerous, and as I said, there are very decent antidotes against it, but you just have to be a little bit careful. As I said, main line with bishop d6 is absolutely acceptable for black, and this is my recommendation, played by Wesley So against Anish Giri. Anyway, that victory brings Naiditsch up to 5.5 out of 7, and he's now just half a point behind the two leaders on 6 points. So it's looking very, very close with 2 rounds to go. There's 2 players on 6, and there's a whole pack of players on 5.5. So there could be a photo finish at the end of the Sharjah Masters.